Hello everyone. Welcome to CellBlock Chronicles. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share our content.
It was a quiet autumn evening when the news broke out about Carl Duncan, the retired prison guard whose life seemed as unremarkable as any other. The man who had spent over 3 decades watching over the inmates of Bracklet Penitentiary had passed away in his sleep at the age of 72, leaving behind a modest legacy of dedication and service. However, it was what came to light after his death that left the entire town reeling. Bracklet Penitentiary was known for housing some of the most notorious criminals in the state. It was a fortress of despair, its high walls and barbed wire keeping society's worst at bay. Within those walls, Carl had been a steady, if unassuming, presence. He was a man who prided himself on his work ethic, known for his punctuality and unwavering demeanor. To his colleagues and the inmates, Carl was just another guard, stern, silent, and seemingly incorruptible. Carl Duncan's house, a small but neatly kept bungalow at the edge of town, was the subject of a police raid a week after his funeral. The authorities had received an anonymous tip that Carl had been involved in something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Behind the modest exterior of Carl's home lay a labyrinthine operation, meticulously documented and carefully hidden. In the basement, they found ledgers, coded messages, and stacks of cash that amounted to millions. Carl Duncan, the unassuming prison guard, had been running one of the most sophisticated drug cartels behind bars. The full scope of his operation remained a mystery, but the evidence pointed to a network that spanned multiple states and involved numerous high-profile criminals. Carl's journey into the underworld began innocuously enough. He was a young man, fresh out of the military and looking for stable employment. Bracklet Penitentiary offered a good salary, benefits, and the promise of a pension after 20 years of service. He took the job, never imagining that it would define the rest of his life. In the early years, Carl was just another guard, doing his rounds and keeping his head down. But the prison environment was a breeding ground for corruption and temptation. It wasn't long before Carl found himself faced with a moral dilemma. One of the inmates, a man named Vito the Snake Lucchese, approached him with an offer that was hard to refuse. Lucchese was a kingpin, serving a life sentence for drug trafficking and murder. Despite his incarceration, he wielded considerable power within the prison walls. "Carl," Lucchese had said one night, his voice barely a whisper, "I can make you rich. All I need is someone on the outside to help move the product." At first, Carl resisted. He was an honest man, after all. But the allure of easy money and the promise of a better life for his family began to erode his resolve. He started small, turning a blind eye to Lucchese's dealings, allowing certain packages through security. It wasn't long before he was fully integrated into the cartel's operations. Years passed, and Carl's role within the cartel grew. He was no longer just a guard. He was the orchestrator, the mastermind who kept everything running smoothly. His military training came in handy, allowing him to devise intricate systems of communication and contraband smuggling that went undetected by his colleagues and superiors. He maintained his cover flawlessly, his outward appearance that of a loyal and diligent employee. Carl's network extended far beyond the prison walls. He had contacts in the outside world who handled the distribution and sale of the drugs. The money flowed in, and Carl became wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. But he never flaunted his wealth. He continued to live a modest life, his outward appearance unchanged, his true nature hidden beneath layers of deception. As Carl approached retirement, he began to contemplate his legacy. He had built an empire, one that had brought him immense wealth and power. But he knew that it was only a matter of time before someone discovered the truth. He had been careful, but no plan was foolproof. In his final years at Bracklet, Carl took steps to distance himself from the cartel. He groomed a successor, a young guard named Tony Alvarez, who showed the same cunning and ambition that Carl had in his youth. Carl taught Tony everything he knew, ensuring that the operation would continue seamlessly after his departure. When Carl finally retired, he did so with the knowledge that he had secured his legacy. He moved to a small town in Florida, where he lived out his remaining years in peace. He never spoke of his past, not even to his family. To them, he was just a retired prison guard, a man who had worked hard and earned his rest. It wasn't until Carl's death that the full extent of his activities came to light. The anonymous tip that led the police to his house was likely the work of a rival or a disgruntled associate. The investigation that followed uncovered a web of deceit and criminality that spanned decades. The public reaction was one of shock and disbelief. How could a man who seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable, have orchestrated such a vast criminal enterprise? Carl Duncan's name became synonymous with betrayal and corruption, his legacy forever tarnished by the revelation of his true nature. In the months that followed, the authorities worked tirelessly to dismantle the cartel that Carl had built. They arrested numerous associates and seized assets worth millions. But the full extent of the network remained elusive. Carl had been too careful, his methods too sophisticated for them to unravel completely. Tony Alvarez, the man Carl had groomed as his successor, managed to evade capture. He had learned well from his mentor, adopting Carl's methods and improving upon them. Under Tony's leadership, the cartel adapted and evolved, becoming even more elusive and dangerous. The story of Carl Duncan became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the corrupting influence of power and greed. But for those who had known him, it was a reminder that the most dangerous criminals are often the ones you least suspect. Tony Alvarez sat in his office, the walls adorned with pictures of his family and awards for his outstanding service as a correctional officer. He glanced at the latest report from his contacts within the cartel. Business was booming despite the increased scrutiny from law enforcement. He thought about Carl Duncan, the man who had given him the keys to the kingdom. Carl's methods had been ingenious, his planning meticulous. Tony had taken those lessons to heart, ensuring that the operation remained as seamless as ever. Tony's phone buzzed, a message from one of his lieutenants. Another shipment had made it through without a hitch. He allowed himself a small smile. The legacy of Carl Duncan lived on, even as the man himself lay buried, his secrets and sins resting with him. As Tony leaned back in his chair, he considered his own future. He knew that one day he too would have to retire, to pass on the torch to someone else. But for now, he was content to continue the work that Carl had started, to maintain the empire that had been built on deception and ruthlessness. Carl Duncan's story would continue to be told, a dark legend that haunted the halls of Bracklet Penitentiary. The guards who had worked alongside him, the inmates who had feared him, and the community that had trusted him would all remember the man who had hidden his true nature so well. For Carl's family, the revelation of his double life was a devastating blow. They struggled to reconcile the loving father and husband they had known with the criminal mastermind he had been. The house in Florida was sold, the proceeds used to pay off legal fees and settle debts. The legacy Carl had hoped to leave his family was one of shame and disgrace. Years later, a young journalist named Sarah Mitchell became fascinated with Carl Duncan's story. She spent months researching his life, interviewing those who had known him and poring over the records that had been made public. Her investigation led her to uncover even more secrets, details that had been overlooked in the initial frenzy of the discovery. One night, as Sarah was working late in her apartment, she received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly. "You're getting too close, Sarah. I suggest you stop before it's too late." The line went dead, leaving Sarah with a sense of unease. She knew she was onto something big, but she also knew the risks. Carl Duncan had been a master of deception, and those who followed in his footsteps were just as dangerous. Sarah decided to take a break, to step back and reassess her investigation. She moved to a new city, changed her number, and focused on other stories. But the allure of Carl Duncan's legacy never left her. She continued to gather information, to piece together the puzzle, always mindful of the shadows that lurked around her. In the end, the story of Carl Duncan remained a chilling reminder of the duality of human nature. A man who had seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable, had hidden a darkness that few could have imagined.
Thank you for watching. Check out our channel for more CellBlock tales.